Welcome to Philosophy 221, the history of philosophy. Today we're going to continue our discussion of intersectionality and identity, complicating embodied experience, subjectivity, and agency as explored by Patricia Hill Collins and Audre Lorde. Now that you've watched the videos, let's continue with our discussion. Slide 13. Now, here is where the contributions of Black feminist thought and Black feminist theory come into play. But what exactly does that mean? That's a lot harder to pin down. In a nutshell, Black feminist thought is a collection of ideas, writings, and art that articulates a standpoint of and for Black women. It describes them as a unique group that exists in a place. And when I say place, I don't mean geography. It's a particular embodied subject position where intersectional processes of race, ethnicity, gender, class, sexual orientation all come together to shape Black women's individual and collective consciousness, their self-definitions, and their actions, their choices. It's a part of standpoint theory, which conceptualizes identity as organic, as fluid, interdependent, multiple, and dynamic in socially constructed locations within a particular historical context. So, Black feminist thought is grounded in Black women's particular historical experience regarding things like enslavement, anti-lynching movements, segregation, the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, sexual politics, capitalism, and patriarchy. Slide 14. So let's talk about Patricia Hill Collins. This week you were given an excerpt from her book, Black Feminist Thought, specifically the sections entitled Why Black Feminist Thought and Black Feminist Practice and Black Feminist Thought. Now, both of these sections really focus on the embodied experience of Black women and their subjectivity and its effect on how we as a subject understand ourselves and understand the world, specifically regarding concepts of intersectionality via what she calls the matrix of domination. So Collins presents the idea that this particular kind of philosophical theory that was produced by and centered on experiences of African American women, shifting notions of what is normal, what is natural, what is neutral, away from a particular embodied subject position that is a male, heteronormative, upper class, European perspective. Right? And it offers two significant contributions toward a more complex understanding of the connections between knowledge, consciousness, and empowerment or agency. So, firstly, by embracing a paradigm of race, class, and gender as interlocking systems of oppression, Black feminist thought really reconceptualized social relations of dominance and resistance. Now, Collins argued that Black feminist thought fosters a fundamental paradigmatic shift that rejects this kind of additive approaches to oppression. We don't just stack things on top of each other. They come together in very complex ways that cannot be separated. So instead of starting with gender, as the second wave feminist movement did, and then adding on other variables like age, sexual orientation, race, class, religion, what Black feminist thought does is it sees all these distinctive systems of oppression as being part of one overarching structure of domination. Viewing structures and relationships of domination as being constructed via a system of interlocking race, class, and gender oppression really expands the focus of analysis from merely describing similarities and differences, distinguishing these kinds of systems of oppression, and focuses more attention on how they are interconnecting, how they feed off of each other, how they rely on one another in order to construct a particular subject position. So, assuming that each system, race, class, gender, sex, sexuality, etc., needs the others in order to function, creates a really distinct theoretical stance that stimulates a rethinking of very basic concepts like the self, freedom, morality, truth, good, right? These are the concepts that we as philosophers are interested in. The second major contribution is that Black feminist thought addresses ongoing epistemological debates in feminist theory and in the sociology of knowledge concerning ways of assessing truth. And we are very concerned with truth, right? Providing opportunities for a variety of groups, a variety of subject positions to express their own knowledge about their own experiences in their own words can reveal new ways of knowing and new approaches to knowledge that allow groups that have traditionally been defined as other, as opposed to natural, normal, neutral, in other words. It allows them to define their own reality. And this has implications for expanding our own ideas of right and wrong, better or worse, good or bad, desirable or undesirable. This is a direct challenge to the idea that good, truth, virtue can somehow be separate from the body and therefore universal. That the idea that one good can exist for all humankind, regardless of factors like gender, sex, sexuality, race. Slide 15. Now, Collin builds on Beauvoir's theory of subject-object relations specifically, and she uses this in a way that I think is very interesting. The male is the subject. He defines history. Male does not need woman. He is independent of woman. He is the absolute, right? In the self, the male ego is fully defined and identity is formed. Female, in opposition, is object. She needs male definition in order to define herself. She does not have her own subject position, right? She exists only in opposition to the natural, the normal, the male. Female is dependent on man. For him, she is sex, absolute sex, no less, right? So she has sex. Man does not have sex. Man is natural. He is neutral. And then finally, female, most importantly for Black feminism, is the other. She is defined in opposition. Slide 16. Now, Collins argues that Black feminist thought is rooted in three basic vectors that form what she called a matrix of domination. Gender, right? Feminine or masculine. And we're not talking about sex, we're talking about gender. Secondly, race. And third, class. Now, according to Collins, these forces work hand in hand, not additively, not piling on top of one another, but interlocking, right? They're in coordination, and they work to affect the lives of not only Black women, but everyone to varying degrees. All of these aspects of the self interlock to create what we think of as ourselves and what others perceive as the self, right? This affects an individual's perception not only of others, but of themselves, of the world, of their choices, of their actions. It shapes their freedom and their authenticity, their subjectivity. Slide 17. So, why does this kind of inequality matter? Why do these unequal relationships of power within this matrix of domination matter? Why should we care? We're all special, right? We're all unique. We're all different. We all have a unique subject position. So why should we spend time thinking about this kind of intersectionality, these intersections of vectors of power? Yes, we are all different. Yes, we are all special. Yes, we are all unique. This is true. However, some forms of knowledge, some forms of being, as we have learned, are more acceptable. They're more valued. They're seen as normal than others within a particular social and historical context. So, Collins argues that inequality functions on three levels: personal, individual, right? Interpersonal relationships, groups, right? Us versus them, and institutional, things that have been incorporated into larger structures, things like government, schools, medicine, right? Okay. Collins' analysis of these inequalities of power decenters traditional Western ways of knowing. So we learned about how Plato and Aristotle and Descartes and a lot of others conceptualized how do we know things. Collins is attempting, and Black feminism is attempting to decenter that from the neutral, natural, male, heteronormative, European, Western subject and move that in a different direction. Right? She argues that particular ways of knowing and being and seeing the world have been institutionalized, have been normalized. And unfortunately, these ways of knowing and being and seeing the world have been used, she argues, as a means of domination and the basis of inequality. Right? Collins takes a different approach. She shifts that by privileging the knowledge that has been internalized and passed on, specifically by marginalized subject positions. In her case, it is African American women. Slide 18. Let's talk about Audre Lorde. Now, Lorde is really interesting. She argues that Western history has conditioned people to view differences as binary opposites. Dominant and subordinate. You are either good or bad. You are either up or down. You are either superior or inferior. There are two options. She also argues that society measures superiority and goodness according to particular standards that are measured by money and profit, class, right? As a result, the inferior groups tend to be Black people, third world people, people of color, Latinos, Asians, right? Working class, blue collar people, the elderly, older people, and women. Right? These are the marginalized. They are outside of the norm. Now, Lorde argues that the pre-existing picture that the dominant class has of the oppressed have to change. And that is the job of the marginalized people. That is the job of the oppressed. They have the responsibility to educate or to reposition themselves in society. Now, Lorde believes that the whole society has to change its way of seeing difference in order for equality to be achieved. Now, currently, she says either we can ignore it, we can pretend like everybody is the same, and everyone has equal opportunities at all times and in all situations. Just ignoring it. Color blindness. You can copy it. So you can have marginalized people that say, okay, well, the standard of success is to be thin and to be fit and to be light-skinned and to be educated and to make a lot of money and have a nice car and have a big house, right? And they can become part of that system, right? Or they can try and tear it down, right? Riots in the streets, setting fire to things, protests, these kinds of things, right? Lorde argues that all people are held up to what she calls an American mythical norm, which is an image of an ideal that American society upholds. And this figure is, she says, white, thin, male, young, heterosexual, Christian, and financially secure. That is the source of power and authority in everyone's minds. This is the person that we trust, right? This is the person that we can rely on. This is the bedrock of our society, right? Even people who don't fit this description have, she argues, internalized this idea of an ideal. This is what we should be. This is what we should aspire to be, to have. Now, Lorde emphasizes that Black women are oppressed not only within and by the white community, but also within the Black community because of intersectionality, because of this matrix of domination. Not only are they not seen as the norm within American society, but they're also seen as subordinate within Black communities because of their sex, because they are women. Women are less than men. If they're lesbians, it further complicates it. They're further on the outside, further on the margins, not fitting into this heteronormative, mainstream, normal idea. So sexuality, gender performance also play a role. Anybody who is non-gender performing or non-heterosexual also has to take into account these variables regarding what other people are going to see them as and whether they're going to be viewed as normal. In part 3, we will move on to our next section on why this is important for the question of philosophy.